So as we begin this next section, we're going to talk about a particular type of graph called a histogram, and we're going to talk about interpreting a histogram, being able to look at the graph and answer questions. So let's start with a definition for what a histogram is. So a histogram is basically a bar graph, and so you may find that the term histogram is not something that is familiar to you, but most students are familiar with what a bar graph is. So you will want to remember that a histogram is a graph that is commonly known as a bar graph. So on this bar graph, you are going to have, I'm just going to sketch real quick right here, across the x-axis, which is going to be the horizontal axis across the bottom, you're going to have the classes marked off. And the graph is going to show the frequencies. Remember that frequency refers to how many. That's going to be on the y-axis, so that's going to be on the axis that goes up and down. And so I usually will just write an F for that, which is going to be an abbreviation for frequency. All right, and then remember that a bar graph is going to have, just to kind of refresh your memory, you're going to have bars drawn to represent the frequencies for each particular class. Okay. All right, so let's look at an example. So we have an example where we have a bar graph that shows the heights of 30 different people. All right, and we see that the heights are listed across the bottom of the graph and the frequencies are across the top. All right, so let's just be sure that we understand what this graph is showing before we get started. All right, so take for example this particular bar right here. So the way I would interpret that bar is I would say that there are 9 people, okay, and I'm getting 9 because the height of the bar is at 9. All right, so there are 9 people that have heights between, and I would look at the bottom, between 149.5 and 159.5. Okay, so 9 people with heights between 149.5 and 159.5. And so you just want to keep that in mind, that as you look at any particular bar, it's going to give you the number of people with heights that fell in that particular class, from the number that begins the bar to the number that ends the bar. All right, so we're going to take a look at some questions, and we'll be kind of coming back to this graph to answer our questions. So let me get rid of. All right, so our first question says, how many people have heights between 169.5 and 179.5? All right, and so I can look at my graph and get this stuff out. All right, so we want the number of people between 169.5 and 179.5. So here's the 169.5, here's the 179.5. We're looking at this particular bar, and we know that that bar has a height of 5. If I look at the top of the bar, I can see that it is at 5. Okay, so the number of people between 169.5 and 179.5 is going to be 5. The next question says, how many people have heights less than 169.5? All right, so I'm going to go back to my graph. I want to do less than 169.5. All right, so what I'm going to do on this graph is I'm going to note where the 169.5 is. So that is right here. And I want to do less than that, which means that I want to look at the bars that are smaller, okay, or to the left of the line that I drew. So I have 3 bars that I want to consider. I've got the first bar, which has a height of 6, the second bar, which has a height of 9, and the third bar, which has a height of 7. So if I want to know how many people have heights of 169.5 or less, I'm going to add those 3 numbers up. So 6 plus 9 plus 7 gives me 22. All right, so we'll go back to our question and we'll put 22 for our answer. All right, the next question says, how many people have heights more than 159.5? All right, so I'm going to go back to my graph. More than 159.5. All right, so let's kind of get rid of this. More than 159.5. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to find 159.5, which is here. And I want to do more than that. So I want to go to the right, to the numbers that are greater. And so I'm going to add up these 4 bars that fall to the right of my line. So the first bar is at 7. The second one has a frequency of 5. The next one has a frequency of 2. And the last one has a frequency of 1. So I'm going to add those 4 numbers up, 7 plus 5 plus 2 plus 1, and that's going to give me 15. All right, so there are 15 people with heights greater than 159.5. All right, the next question is a little bit different. It says the most common height fell between what 2 measurements? So we want to look, if it's asking for the most common height, we want to look for the highest bar. That would tell me that the frequency would be the greatest for that particular height. All right, so I'm going to go back to my picture. I'm looking for the highest bar. My highest bar is here. And so I have the most number of people between 149.5 and 159.5. So 149.5 to 159.5. And then the next question says the least common height fell between what 2 measurements? So again, if it's asking for least common, it's basically asking me for the lowest bar, the one with the lowest frequency. So I'm going to go back to my graph and look. The bar with the lowest frequency is here. All right, so between 189.5 and 199.5. All right, so that gives you an example of taking a look at a histogram and then interpreting that histogram to answer questions about a particular data set.